Hello, and welcome back to the third installment of our season previews here at Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive on the Philadelphia Flyers. My name's Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Time to get started.
Some of the key offseason additions for the Philadelphia Flyers was the controversial draft pick of Matvei Michkov, Sean Walker, Garnet Hathaway, Mark Stahl, Ryan Poehling, Victor Mete, and Calvin Peterson. Ryan Poehling comes from the Pittsburgh Penguins, where he posted 14 points through 53 games, and Calvin Peterson comes from a cap dump from the LA Kings, where he had a tough year. I'm not going to lie. He posted 3.75 goals against average and an 868 save percentage through 10 games and was sent down to the Ontario Reign, where he continued to post subpar numbers.
Now on to the key subtractions for the Philadelphia Flyers. As we mentioned in the Provorov trade, Provorov is now gone, and a few other defensemen, including Tony DeAngelo and Justin Brown, have also parted ways with the team. Kevin Hayes was also dealt last year, and forwards James Van Riemsdyk, among others, have been located to other places. Now, the first of the biggest arrivals is Sean Walker. This is one of the defensemen that was acquired in the Provorov trade with the LA Kings and the Columbus Jackets in a three-way trade. Now, Sean Walker is a smaller defenseman that the NHL does not like, but he moves the puck very, very well, and he plays a very good sheltered position of defense. He'd be great on the third pair of any championship team. I expect him to play in some decent minutes if given the opportunity, and he's not much of a point producer, as you can see, but he's a very solid depth option.
Garnet Hathaway signed a 2-year, $2.375 million deal with the Flyers this offseason. He's a gritty forward who fits the traditional Flyers style of play. Last year, he had 268 hits through 84 games. He was traded halfway through, so that's why he's at 84 and not 82. And that's over 3 hits a game. So he's quite the physical presence out there on the ice. And it's a fair contract that is movable at this year's deadline or the next one. It just really depends what the team decides to do and how he plays.
And following the trend of Garnet Hathaway with big guys who play physically is Mark Stahl. So he was added as a free agent signing as well. Pretty low risk deal with a 1 year, $1.1 million contract. He's contributed pretty well to the Florida Panthers, but it's pretty evident that he's lost a step and he's really slowed down as he's aged to the point where he's 36 years old now and he has a difficult time keeping up. But good depth option here for the Philadelphia Flyers, and maybe he gets moved at the deadline, much like we said about Hathaway. Moving on from the offseason that the Flyers had to the future outlook for this team. So, as you can see, they've got some pretty high end talent in their prospect pool. And even omitted from this list is recent first round draft pick Oliver Bonk, who some scouts aren't as high on, but at least brings some good size at the defensive position. But some big names here are Matvei Michkov, Cutter Gauthier, Tyson Forster, and Bobby Brink, all pretty well known amongst NHL circles. And then moving on to their draft capital, they have pretty much all of their own picks. So that's always a good start for a rebuilding team. And they added that Florida first round pick, I believe, from the Claude Giroux trade. And then, Nick, if you wanted to touch on that compensatory pick there.
Yeah, so when teams don't sign their first round pick after their rights expire, if they can't come to an agreement, typically within the CBA, they are awarded a compensatory second round pick. It just adds on to the end of the round usually, so it'd be like a 65th team on average. So basically, because of Jay O'Brien, the prospect that was formerly drafted by the Flyers first overall a few years ago, did not sign with the team, they are awarded a compensatory pick. And this is a pretty smart move based on how Jay O'Brien was doing in college. He wasn't performing exceptionally well compared to people in his draft class. Therefore, they get a free second round pick basically out of this because of their choice not to sign him. Jay O'Brien is now on a AHL PTO with the Leafs, basically. Moving on to prospects that are still within the Flyers system. We're looking at the prospect spotlight of three prospects: Matvei Michkov, Cutter Gauthier, and Tyson Forster. Matvei Michkov has been performing exceptionally well against men in Russia. He's been playing in the KHL for a few years now, and he is contracted for a few more as well until 2026. So it'll be interesting to see how the Flyers handle his contract and whether they do see him in the future or if he just sticks in Russia. You never really know at this point. It is a gamble that they made, but he is such a highly touted and highly talented player that this might be worth it. Matvei Michkov has performed unlike any other Russian young prospect since probably Ovechkin at the time. He is now 18 years old, but he was playing in the KHL at 17 and 18 years old against a bunch of men, and he was performing upwards of 0.75 points per game, which is something unheard of at the time. Cutter Gauthier, on the other hand, is an American product that has now been going through the NCAA, and as you can see, had a tremendous year as a freshman. He should be looking to make an easy jump to the NHL based on this. He's a 6'2" forward, almost 200 pounds. He's only 19. He's got some speed. He's got some grit. He's kind of everything you want in a Flyers player. So this is someone that fans should be excited for. Now for a prospect that is closer to making the opening day lineup, Tyson Foerster has proven to be a project that turned into such a great story. There were questions about his skating coming into the draft, and that's probably why he was drafted so low, number 23rd overall in the first round in 2020. And it has taken him a few years to sort of adjust to pro level speed. However, he performed in Barrie in the OHL, he performed in the AHL with Lehigh Valley, and he's also going to perform with the Flyers. As you can see, he's only played 8 games, but he's already almost at a point per game. Despite the small sample, I see big things coming for Tyson Foerster. He's going to challenge other rookies around the NHL next year.
Moving on from the future to the present here, we're going to take a look at the lineup for the Philadelphia Flyers, starting with the forwards. So as you can see, it's a pretty solid first line with Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost, and Owen Tippett. Owen Tippett in particular is somebody who really burst onto the scene last year after a trade from Florida. He's putting up a lot of points. He actually hits a bit more than you'd think as well. So that's a really exciting player to watch this year and look for him to have even more of a breakout. And then the second line has Cam Atkinson and Sean Couturier on it, who are both coming back from, I believe, entire season-long injuries, or at least the better part of last season they missed with injury. And then Travis Konechny on that right wing, who's a pretty feisty player and loves to get in the mix of it. Great player there. And then that's a pretty solid first line as well with Scott Lawton, Noah Cates, who was just recently signed, and Tyson Foerster. So overall pretty solid. And then honestly, probably going to be one of the toughest fourth lines to play against in the NHL with Delorier and Hathaway there, both players who love to throw their weight around. Both can fight, both can hit. So that's going to be not a fun line for other teams to play against. And then in terms of the players who are trying to make it into the lineup here, we got Wade Allison, another physical player, and Adam Brooks, who we saw in his time at Toronto. He has some upside. He played really well in the WHL when he was coming up, but hasn't really been able to crack an everyday NHL roster to this point.
Now on to the defense. There were some subtractions, as we mentioned previously, but this leaves us with Travis Sanheim and Rasmus Ristolainen at the top, and some areas for younger players to come through, such as Cam York, who had a great season last year, despite the huge jump from college to pro. Sean Walker, as we mentioned, as a prime acquisition for this team, will be playing in the third pair alongside physical demon Nick Seeler. Now, this, I believe, will be a great sequence for the Flyers to throw out Sanheim and Ristolainen as the high-octane offense, probably a high-risk, high-reward type of decor. But overall, then you have Mark Stahl and Cam York, a good combination of physicality and skill, and then Nick Seeler and Sean Walker, which is another surprisingly good combination of physicality and skill. So this is possibly an underrated core, but maybe it is fairly rated as a bottom half of the league core. It is still a decent defense core to look at.
And finally, moving on to the goalies, we have Carter Hart as the starter. He's a household name, but he's kind of struggled with his recent seasons. But again, he's been playing behind a very pretty terrible team. Cal Peterson was brought in from LA, and then also Samuel Ersson, who is just signed to a deal, I think around 1.4 AAV. He's a young guy looking to prove himself in the NHL. It's kind of a bottleneck there for the backup position behind Carter Hart between Cal Peterson and Samuel Ersson. Not sure who's going to take that, but again, it's not going to be a very not a very good team that they're playing behind, so they're going to struggle regardless. And Felix Sandstrom is another player that's name is out there that he had some games last year and could take some games for this season.
That'll lead us perfectly into our 2023-2024 storylines for the Philadelphia Flyers because the biggest one surrounding the Flyers here is the trade rumors surrounding Carter Hart. So last year he put up a 907 save percentage and a 2.94 goals against, which considering he was playing on the pretty miserable Flyers is honestly reasonably impressive. I know he faced a lot of shots and did all right, but he hasn't quite lived up to the hype that he once had as kind of the next Carey Price, I guess, is what people were really saying is he's the next Canadian prodigy goaltender. And he's been a good NHL starter, but he has not become that elite goaltender that people would have hoped. So some teams that have been rumored to be in on him, or Montreal has been rumored has been linked with him for a while, as well as a team that's definitely looking to improve their goaltending, like Los Angeles, who currently has Phoenix Copley and Cam Talbot as their tandem.
Yeah, I remember hearing rumors about Edmonton. I think that was last
Mm,
season or the season prior, but that looks to be snuffed out since the signing of Jack Campbell and Stuart Skinner's emergence.
yeah. And then the next storyline here that we're going to be following with the Philadelphia Flyers is basically what's been going on with them and their Russian players. So the guy on the left there is Ivan Fedotov, and if you haven't been following the story very closely, about a year ago he signed a contract with the Philadelphia Flyers. Due to everything that was going on there, I believe he was forced into military service. So because of that, they kicked his contract back a year, and the expectation was he'd complete his military service and then come over to North America this season. So that didn't end up happening. He signed a KHL contract, and basically the Philadelphia Flyers took a dispute to the IIHF. They ruled in favor of the Flyers and said that they had a valid contract and he should be playing for the Philadelphia Flyers. But Fedotov and his KHL team basically just disregarded that ruling, and they're going to be barred from international play for a year or something to that effect. But what really is the sticking point of this is I don't think the Flyers are too worried about Ivan Fedotov, but what's very concerning is what's going on with Matvei Michkov, as he's been a healthy scratch in 3 out of the first 4 games his team's played, and he's under contract in the KHL until 2026. And when he was drafted, there was a lot of optimism and a lot of talk about how he might be able to get out of that contract earlier. But based on the nature of the relations of what's going on between NHL teams and KHL teams at the moment, particularly with the Philadelphia Flyers, I mean, they've got to be pretty worried about this high risk that they've taken on such a talented player.
Yeah, they have absolutely zero control over his development in the KHL. So while he's over there, there's not much they can do. They see him being healthy scratch, and obviously they would like him to play. They would like him to develop as a player, but there's just nothing they can do. They can just watch from the sidelines and watch him sit.
Yeah, and this is why certain teams will try to make moves for players such as Edward Saleh, who's going to be playing in the OHL next year, somebody that could be playing in the men's league in his home country, which he's from the Czech Republic, the Czechia. But some people like Matvei Michkov are pretty much stuck in Russia for the duration of this contract. There are too many politics to get into with regards to his contract, so it's a really tough scenario for the Flyers. I was curious when he was going to go in this draft. I think everyone was.
Mm,
It's possible that he could be the second best most skilled player out of the draft behind Bedard.
for
However,
sure.
he went at seventh to Philadelphia, being passed up with for the likes of Will Smith, Simashev, David Reinbacher, among others. So it is quite interesting to see that he did still go in a pretty high spot. But what's he going to do in the next couple of years? What's he going to do in 5 years from now? That's going to help the Flyers out.
I mean, I think the other thing to just add here too is it doesn't really seem to be benefiting anybody to have him sitting as a healthy scratch. Like the team he's playing for has the option to send him down to a team where he'd play meaningful minutes. So it almost seems like they're trying to make a point to the Philadelphia Flyers that they're going to do what they want to do. So that's probably the most concerning thing of this whole saga at this
He
time.
wasn't bad last year either in the
No, he was
KHL.
great.
He was, I think, over half point per game as a
Yeah,
17-year-old, so he'd only get better. So it's not performance wise that they're scratching him.
exactly. Moving on to our final storyline here. It's just the fact that they've finally begun rebuild in Philadelphia. It's been long overdue. They had Chuck Fletcher there for a number of years, and if you know anything about NHL management, you know he's not
Incompetent.
he, he's definitely not the best. He's probably one of the worst general managers in recent history. He loves to throw money at his issues and just doesn't really make good moves. If you go through his trades, his signings, pretty much none of them work out. So Danny Briere has a big task in front of him trying to rectify the mess that Chuck Fletcher has made, but he's off to a pretty good start. The Ivan Provorov trade was a fantastic one in my opinion. They were able to trade him with retention, but weren't the team who retained money by taking back Cal Peterson. And in return, they ended up getting a first and 2 seconds out of it. So that's a great start to the rebuild. The one that's a bit more head scratching is the Kevin Hayes trade, where they were only able to manage to get a sixth round pick in return for Kevin Hayes, who they retained 50% on for the next 3 years, which is over 3.5 million per season. So with as the cap as valuable it is right now, it's a little bit head scratching. They weren't able to get more back, but I guess it just speaks to the value of that player.
Yeah, I think that Daniel Beer's vision, clearly from all these moves, is that come back and check on us in 2026. Probably we'll have
Yeah.
our best player. We'll have all our retention gone. We'll have all these all these contracts that we don't want are going to be out of our books, and we're going to have a competitive young team by that point with a bunch of our prospects growing as they should and developing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they already have a lot of young players in the NHL. We saw Tyson Forrester, Morgan Frost. So a lot of guys, and then some other guys that they can also move in Lawton and uh, Sanheim. So it's a pretty exciting time to be a Flyers fan. I think now that they've finally started the rebuild, you can probably feel good about yourself. And now that Chuck Fletcher is no longer the driver, you probably feel quite a bit better.
I'm interested with what's going to happen with Konechny. He posted a solid year last year
Mm,
before he got injured, so that's just another piece that Briere has to decide what to do with.
for
He could be
sure.
the next Brandon Hagel,
Oh,
Yeah.
true.
potentially the guy who's gone because he's even though he's quite young.
Yep. Moving on to our final segment here, we're just going to do an overview of the entirety of the 2023-2024 outlook for the Philadelphia Flyers. So, beginning with some grades, we gave them a B plus for the offseason. I mean, I think despite the risk, selecting Michkov was borderline a no-brainer because just the skill Nick mentioned, it's my opinion he's the second best player coming out of that draft. I mean, Fantilli's a close three, but I think the upside Michkov has and the comparisons to Ovechkin in terms of his production at such a young age, it's he could end up being the second best player out of that draft easily, and just hopefully that works out. But the thing that brought them down a little bit was probably that Kevin Hayes trade because, like I said, I think the Ivan Provorov trade was a good piece of business. In terms of the on ice grades, the offensive strength, defensive strengths, and goaltending strength, all in the C to C plus range. It's a solid team. Um, they do have a good goaltender at the starting for them in Carter Hart, but what really brings that grade down is the fact that you have Cal Peterson backing him up, who's, as Noel said, has had quite a rough go in recent years. And then in terms of the future outlook, I mean, they have a pretty good prospect pool at the top, as well as some great young players who are already in the lineup. So it's things are starting to look up for Philadelphia fans, and couldn't be happier about that.
Yeah, in terms of our projected Eastern Conference standing, we have them finishing last. No surprise there. It's going to be a tough year for them, but hopefully we see some development from the young guys such as Frost, Tippett, and hopefully things are looking up for them in the future.
Just in terms of our overall rankings, Nick had them 30th, I had them 31st, and Noel had them in the same place at 31st. So results in them being last place in the Eastern Conference. And as we move up the teams here, uh, by going in reverse order of standings, we'll address all these teams. So thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and can't wait to see you guys again in the next one.